It wasn't the kind of morning Elena had prepared for. The sky over Manhattan had just begun to turn that pale glassy blue of early dawn. In the penthouse suite of the Voss Tower, the air was filled with silence. Expensive silence, the kind that cost $22,000 a square foot. And in that silence, a man was gasping for air. Aidan Voss, 35, billionaire founder of Voss Biotech, was slumped against the armrest of his Italian leather sofa. His crisp white shirt damp with sweat, his breathing came in short, staggered bursts. One of his hands clutched at the base of his neck, and the other trembled on his thigh as if trying to hold something inside that refused to be contained. From across the room, Elena watched, frozen, the mop in her hand dripping onto the marble floor. He had been fine minutes ago, or so she thought. Now she saw what she had only suspected before, the way his lips turned slightly blue, the confusion in his eyes, the light sheen of sweat that clung to his temples every morning, the shake in his fingers when he signed off on contracts. But this was different. This was dangerous. She dropped the mop and rushed toward him. "Mr. Voss," she said, kneeling beside him. "Can you hear me?" His eyes flickered in her direction, unfocused. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a broken whisper, something that sounded like her name or maybe someone else's. Elena placed 2 fingers gently on the side of his neck. His pulse was rapid, erratic, the kind of pulse you memorized when you had spent 4 years in a clinical setting before everything in your life fell apart. She needed to keep him conscious. She needed to act fast. The thermostat was still set to 75, but his body was overheating. She looked around. No towels, no ice, no cold water. Her own shirt. She didn't even think. In one swift motion, she pulled the white uniform blouse over her head, revealing the simple sports bra beneath. She folded the shirt and slipped it gently behind his neck, propping up his head to elevate blood flow. Her hands moved with the precision of someone who had done this before, long before she became just a maid in the eyes of the world. His breath hitched as she tilted his head slightly back. His lips were inches from the exposed skin of her collarbone. A sound escaped him, something between a sigh and a groan, but she knew it was pain, not desire. Still, the heat between them was tangible, not erotic, not yet, just intense. Her fingers trembled slightly as they brushed a damp strand of hair from his forehead. It was the first time she had touched him like this. The first time anyone had. Then his hand twitched. "Elena," he murmured, not in a professional tone, not as an employer, as if he had known her longer, as if he had seen something behind the name. "I'm calling for help," she said quickly, reaching for the phone on the coffee table. But he grabbed her wrist, weakly, desperately. "No hospital." He said the words barely forming. "Mr. Voss, your symptoms suggest you might be having a stroke. Or worse, I need to call someone now." He shook his head slowly. "Just wait, please." His eyes locked with hers. They were scared. Not of dying, she realized, but of being seen like this. Vulnerable, powerless, human. She hesitated. The man who had barely acknowledged her for months, who had spoken to her like background noise, who had once told her not to polish the floors too loudly. He was now clinging to her voice like it was the only anchor left. She took a breath, lowered the phone. "I'll stay," she whispered, "but only if you let me help." He gave a barely perceptible nod. She slid behind him, carefully pressing her folded shirt deeper into his nape, letting his weight lean back slightly into her. His body was warm, heavy, fragile in a way that contradicted everything about the man she thought she knew. And for the first time since she walked into this penthouse 6 months ago, she wasn't invisible. She was essential. Outside, the sirens of the city began to rise far in the distance, blending with the hum of the elevator shaft. But in this room, in that moment, the world had narrowed down to 2 people. A maid in a sports bra holding a billionaire in distress, both of them breathing against time. What he did next would change everything. And Elena had no idea just how much. Elena had worked in the Voss Tower for 6 months, long enough to understand that luxury was often a mask for dysfunction. The penthouse was immaculate, clinically curated with clean lines and white marble, but no warmth, no photos, no clutter, just cold perfection. That's what she had thought of Aiden Voss, too, cold perfection in human form. Tall, impeccably dressed, sharp in speech, emotionally unreachable. A man who walked through rooms like they owed him their silence. He had rarely spoken to her beyond the occasional instruction. No good mornings, no thank yous, just nods, clipped commands, and silence. But silence spoke volumes. Elena noticed the small things, the way he sometimes stopped mid-sentence on phone calls, lost in thought. The subtle tremor in his left hand when he reached for his coffee, the occasional wince when he stood too quickly. At first she dismissed it. People like him didn't falter, they conquered, but the signs kept returning. He began forgetting names. He signed 2 contracts twice. One day he entered the penthouse and left the front door wide open. That was when she started writing things down. Not because she wanted to meddle, but because her instincts refused to shut off. Before she wore a maid's uniform, she had worn scrubs. 4 years of medical school, 2 years in physiotherapy specialization. She was a semester away from graduation when her life came undone. A professor with influence, a false accusation, and a scandal no one cared to question. Her scholarship vanished, her license suspended before it could exist. And just like that, she fell from medical rounds to mopping marble. Elena never told anyone. She just adapted and observed, especially when her new employer began slipping through the cracks of his own empire. The man she had held in her arms that morning hadn't been arrogant. He had been scared, fragile, human. She hadn't been able to stop thinking about it all day. The way his fingers had wrapped weakly around her wrist, not to dominate but to plead. The way his eyes softened when he said her name. Elena. He remembered it. That mattered more than she wanted to admit. She didn't return to his apartment until evening. He had insisted on no hospital, but she had made a deal with one of the building's private physicians to stop by under the guise of routine consultation. Aiden hadn't resisted, but he hadn't spoken much either. Just silence, heavy, uncomfortable. She found him in his bedroom, shirtless, seated on the edge of the bed, staring at the city skyline like it owed him something. His skin looked pale, as if even his arrogance had dimmed. "You should be lying down," she said gently, placing a tray of herbal tea and crackers beside him. "Not hungry," he muttered. "You need to eat. Even kings collapse without fuel." "I'm not a king, no," she said, sitting across from him. "But you're acting like the world doesn't get to see your pain." That's a kingdom mindset. A beat passed, his jaw clenched. Then without looking at her, he said, "Why did you help me?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean you could have walked out? Called someone else? Let me deal with it. That's what people usually do when I fall apart. Maybe I'm not most people." "You're not," he said quietly. Another pause. Then he turned his head, finally meeting her gaze. "And that's why I'm trying to figure out who you really are." Her heart stumbled. The space between them tightened, not physically, but energetically. She stood to distract herself. "I should clean the kitchen." "Stay," he said, his voice almost a whisper. Just for a minute, she hesitated, then sat again. He studied her. "You're not just a maid, and you're not just a billionaire," she said softly. He gave a short breath of laughter, one without humor. "Is that what you think?" "No, that's what I see." She leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees. "I see someone who's been hiding pain for months, who's trying to keep control of something already slipping. I see a man who's scared but refuses to admit it. And I see someone who's exhausted from being worshipped by everyone and understood by no one." His lips parted slightly as if to object, but nothing came out. Silence again, but this time it was softer. "And what do you want from me?" he finally asked. "Nothing," she said honestly. "I just don't want to lose another patient because I stayed silent." Patient I used to be in training to become a physical therapist. I wasn't always this. He nodded slowly. "I knew there was something." She blinked. "What, the way you touched the back of my neck? You knew where the pressure points were. You moved like someone who's practiced care, not obedience." Their eyes met again, longer this time. He stood slowly and walked toward her. He stopped just a foot away, close enough that she could feel the heat from his chest, close enough to hear the weight in his breath. "You stripped to save me," he said, voice low, raw. "And I can't stop seeing it." Her breath caught. She stood unsure if she should create distance. He didn't move closer, just stood there, vulnerable. Not a predator, not a boss, just a man. "It wasn't like that," she said, voice barely audible. "I know. That's why it means something." Her hand brushed his forearm as she passed him. A spark, not fire, not lust, just something beginning. "Rest," she said, not turning back. "You'll need your strength. This isn't over yet." And she was right. It wasn't. For the next several days, the rhythm of the penthouse shifted almost imperceptibly at first. The sterile silence that once defined the space began to fill with the subtle hum of presence. Aiden, though still visibly weak, no longer pretended to be invincible. And Elena, though still in her uniform, no longer moved through the rooms as a ghost. It began with breakfast. Aiden, who had always skipped it, now sat at the counter, while Elena prepared eggs and toast. Not because he asked for it, but because she insisted. At first, he barely ate. Then slowly he started finishing the plate. He didn't talk much, but his eyes followed her. Every movement, every word. One morning while pouring him coffee, her sleeve brushed against his hand. The contact was accidental, but the pause that followed wasn't. His gaze dropped to her fingers. She noticed. Neither of them said a word, but something passed between them. Not yet desire, but awareness. The awareness of bodies inhabiting the same air. She tried to ignore it, but it followed them everywhere. in the quiet moments between tasks, in the way his eyes lingered when she leaned across the table to wipe something, in the way he asked if she would sit a little longer after dinner just to talk. And talk they did, about everything and nothing. He told her about his father, a man who built a fortune from pharmaceuticals, but raised his son like a liability. About the boarding schools, the boardrooms, the burden of being the heir to a legacy built on control. She told him about school, how she fell in love with the human body's resilience, how she worked nights just to afford tuition, how her life unraveled because someone decided her truth was inconvenient. One night, a power outage swept through the tower. The generator would take 15 minutes to kick in. The penthouse dimmed into near blackness. Aiden cursed quietly, fumbling in a drawer for a flashlight. Elena, already carrying a candle she had lit in the kitchen, approached. The flame illuminated her face in gold, casting shadows along her collarbones. "You okay?" she asked. "I hate the dark," he muttered. "Why? Because I've spent most of my life pretending I could see everything." The honesty surprised her. She stepped closer, holding the candle between them. "Sometimes," she said, "darkness tells us what light hides." He looked at her then, really looked, her face so close now, the soft curve of her cheekbones, the scent of soap on her skin. "You always talk like that?" he asked, voice lower than usual. "Like what?" "Like you're reading thoughts I didn't say out loud." She smiled just barely. "Maybe I am." The tension was so thick it pressed against their skin. Her breath caught as he leaned slightly forward. Just a fraction, just enough. But then the lights flickered back on, and he blinked, stepping back. The moment dissolved, but its residue remained. The next day, he asked her to help with a stiffness in his shoulder. It was a casual request, but she recognized the subtext. He trusted her now. He wanted her touch, not just her tasks. She told herself it was just therapeutic, but when her hands slid under the fabric of his t-shirt, pressing gently against the tight muscles, her pulse betrayed her. She felt his breath hitch. She pretended not to notice. But then he turned his head and looked at her. Their faces were inches apart. "You're good at this," he said. "I used to be," she whispered. "You still are." "I'm not licensed anymore. That's just paper. You have hands that remember how to heal." Their eyes locked. A beat passed, then another. She pulled back slowly, her hands shaking slightly. "That should help with circulation," she said, retreating behind professionalism. But the look in his eyes told her he had felt it too. That night she couldn't sleep. She replayed the sensation of his skin under her fingertips, the warmth, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her now. She wasn't supposed to fall for him. It was reckless, illogical, dangerous, but hearts never cared for logic. The next evening she found him in the study, sitting in a dark corner with a glass of scotch untouched. He looked distant, like he was watching something only he could see. "You don't drink that," she said, nodding at the glass. "Not usually," he replied, "but sometimes I forget who I am without the noise." She walked in, taking the glass gently from his hand and setting it down. "Maybe you're someone better without it." He looked up at her. "Why are you still here, Elena?" "Because you're still pretending you don't need saving, and you think you can save me." "No," she said honestly, "but I think you can save yourself if someone reminds you that you're worth saving." Something shifted in his expression. He reached up, touching the edge of her wrist, barely grazing the skin. It wasn't sexual, not yet, but it was intimate in a way that made her breath hitch. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "Your old life?" "Every day," she admitted, "and every day I try not to let that grief become bitterness." "You don't seem bitter." "That's because I'm too tired to be angry. You hide it well, so do you." He smiled, then small but real. It cracked something open, and for the first time she saw the man behind the empire. Lonely, wounded, beautiful in his brokenness. She didn't know what this was between them. It wasn't romance, not yet, but it was the beginning of something neither of them could name. Not healing, not love, just possibility. And possibility, she knew, was the most dangerous thing of all. 3 weeks after the morning, she stripped off her blouse to stop him from collapsing. Elena found herself standing in the Voss Tower elevator, holding a manila folder that weighed far more than it should have. Not physically, emotionally. Inside were her notes, precise and clinical, handwritten on blank white pages with no letterhead. Observations, patterns, symptoms, dated entries. She had hesitated to compile it, knowing how it might be received. But something had shifted in her, in him. This wasn't about boundaries anymore. It was about survival. Aiden had grown quieter over the past few days, more distracted. There were flashes of his usual self-sharpness intensity, stubborn pride, but more often now. He stood in front of windows, as if searching for something he couldn't name. He had forgotten her name once, only for a second, but that second had frozen her blood. Elena. He had always said it like a secret. This time, he had said it like a stranger. She knew the signs. She had studied neurology, interned with trauma patients. This wasn't burnout or stress. It was neurological, something degenerative. She had lost someone once to symptoms like these. A young man with a bright smile and a seizure disorder that no one believed until it was too late. His name was Dario. Her first patient, her first failure. She hadn't been allowed to sign the charts, but she had begged the attending physician to approve a scan. He had refused. Dario died 2 days later. She had carried that silence like a sentence. Now Aiden was showing the same patterns: sudden memory lapses, uneven gait, minor hallucinations, moments of delayed response. He had laughed off her concern, calling her overprotective. But she wasn't laughing anymore. She had reached out to someone, a retired neurologist named Dr. Miriam Cole, who once taught a seminar Elena attended. She had sent a few anonymized entries from her notes. Dr. Cole had called within the hour. "This is serious. You're describing potential pressure on the brain, possibly a mass. This man needs imaging now." That phone call had stripped away Elena's last excuse to stay silent. So now here she was. The elevator opened. The penthouse was quiet. Aiden was in the study. He didn't look up when she walked in. His eyes were glazed, fixated on an old photograph of his mother. He looked years older than he had a week ago. "You should sit," she said softly. He blinked, then turned to her, something in his gaze catching. Suspicion, maybe, or fatigue. He sat. She handed him the folder. "What's this? Something I should have shown you earlier." He opened it, flipping through the pages. His brow furrowed. He read quickly. At first, his expression was blank. Then something hardened. "What is this supposed to be?" "Documentation," she said, "of what I've observed." over the last 2 months, your symptoms. They're not just stress, Aiden. They're clinical. He looked up sharply. So now you're diagnosing me? No, she said. I'm not a doctor anymore. I don't have that right, but I have the knowledge. And I've seen this before. You've been keeping a file on me to save your life without telling me because you wouldn't have listened. He stood abruptly, the folder dropping to the floor, papers scattered. Do you know what this looks like? Yes, she said quietly. It looks like a woman trying to stop another man from dying while pretending he's invincible. He turned away, his hands shaking. I don't need pity. It's not pity. Then what is it? He demanded. Love. The word hit the air like a gunshot. Neither of them moved. Her voice was steady. I don't know, maybe. Or maybe it's guilt or responsibility. But I do know this. I won't let you become another name, I whisper to myself at night, because I didn't fight hard enough. He slowly sank into the chair, his hands covering his face. I'm scared, he whispered. I know. I can't afford to be sick. The board will smell blood. Then let them smell it. Let them drown in it. But don't let it kill you just to keep them happy. Silence stretched between them. Then he looked up. There's something I never told you. She waited. 6 years ago, he said I pulled funding from a community clinic in Brooklyn. My father wanted the capital moved to a private venture. I didn't fight him. One of the patients there, a boy named Dario, I think, he died because they didn't have the tech they needed. I was told it was unrelated, but I knew. I've known. I just buried it. Her knees weakened. She gripped the edge of the chair. You knew Dario. I met him once. Briefly. He asked me if I believed in second chances. I didn't answer. The room tilted. Her past and his were no longer separate threads. They had always been knotted. He was my patient, she said. My first. Aiden's eyes widened. That's why you wouldn't give up. That's why I can't. Neither of them spoke for a long time. When he finally reached out, she didn't pull away. His hand was warm, fragile, real, and for the first time they were not just Maid and Billionaire. Not just broken souls crossing paths. They were the living echo of a tragedy neither had healed from, until now. The silence in the room was no longer a soft understanding, but a dense weight pressing against both of them. After the revelation about Dario, neither Elena nor Aiden could quite return to the comfort of unspoken things. The truth had surfaced, and with it came the cost of knowing. Over the next few days, Aiden grew increasingly withdrawn. He refused to take any calls from his board members, ignored the company's legal team, and skipped 3 executive meetings that would have been unthinkable for him to miss just weeks before. Elena watched him spiral slowly, not in panic, but in stubborn denial. He began hiding the shakiness in his hands by shoving them into his pockets. His voice faltered in longer sentences, so he kept things curt. And then one morning, while she was folding laundry in the guest room, she overheard him yelling on the phone. There is no need for a formal medical leave. My team is incompetent, not my brain. A pause. Then louder. No, you don't get to threaten me with a vote of no confidence. I built this damn company. I am the company. The call ended with a violent thud. She heard glass shatter. When she walked into the room, he was standing near the fireplace, breathing hard pieces of a broken tumbler glittering at his feet like tiny knives. You shouldn't have heard that, he said without turning around. Then maybe you shouldn't shout at people who don't care if you die, she replied softly. You think I don't know what's happening to me, he said, voice trembling. You think I don't feel it every time I forget where I left something or when I can't remember the last sentence I spoke. I know, Elena, I know more than anyone. Then why won't you do something about it? Because if I admit it, it becomes real. It's already real. He turned to face her. I can't be weak. Not in this world. Not in my world. The moment they smell weakness, they tear you apart. And I've spent my entire life becoming untouchable. But you're not untouchable, she whispered. You're human, and being human is not a weakness. Tell that to the investors. Tell that to the board. Tell it to me, she said, stepping closer. Because I'm not leaving until you stop pretending. This is something you can beat alone. His face softened, and for a moment she saw him break, just enough. But that night he disappeared. She woke to find his room empty, no sign of where he had gone. His driver didn't answer. His phone was off. Panic twisted through her like a wire. Hours passed. She called the hospitals, the private clinic, even Dr. Cole, but no one had seen him. When he finally returned, it was almost midnight. He was unshaven, drenched from the rain, and silent. Elena opened the door before he could knock. Where were you? She asked, more breath than sound. I needed air. You needed to run, she corrected, because that's what you do when things get close. And what do you do? He asked, his voice low. You save people who don't want to be saved. Only the ones worth saving. And what if I'm not? Then I'll be wrong, she said, but I'll never be cruel. He stepped inside soaked shoes, squeaking softly against the marble. This is cruel, he said, not looking at her. Letting you care this much. Then stop pretending you don't need it. What do you want from me? Elena, I want you to live. Why, he asked, turning sharply. Why do you care if I live or die? I've been awful to you. I've ignored you, condescended to you, dismissed you, like a piece of the furniture. Why would you fight this hard? She didn't flinch. Because I see you, not who you pretend to be, the man underneath all that armor. And I think he's worth the fight. He stared at her for a long moment, and then without warning, his expression cracked. He looked suddenly small, tired, defeated. I'm scared, he admitted. Then let me stand beside you. You can't fix me. I don't want to fix you. I want to stay when everyone else leaves. He closed his eyes. You're the only one who came back. And I always will, she said, but the truth was she wasn't sure how much longer she could watch him destroy himself. Not when she knew how this story ended if he didn't surrender. And she was terrified he never would. The call came just after dawn, a voice Elena didn't recognize, asking if she could be at the Voss mansion within the hour. Something had happened, something urgent. When she arrived, the driveway was already filled with cars. The household staff looked nervous. Men in suits gathered by the windows, murmuring to one another. And standing at the edge of the main foyer was Margaret Voss Aiden's estranged mother, flanked by 2 board members. Elena had only seen her in press photos, always dressed like royalty, who had grown bored of her crown. But today there was a stiffness in her posture that suggested more than elegance. It was fear. Margaret's eyes landed on Elena, and for a moment she said nothing. Then she gestured for her to follow. They walked through a hallway of portraits, down a long staircase, into a sitting room that looked barely used. "I've read your notes," Margaret said without preamble. "All of them." Elena froze. How he left them on his desk, open, as if he wanted someone to find them. Elena's breath caught. "Then you know what he's risking by avoiding treatment." "I do. That's why we're doing this." Margaret motioned to the board members waiting outside. "We told him this was a strategic meeting." "In truth, it's an intervention." Elena blinked. "He won't respond well to pressure. He won't respond to anything else. Then he'll feel ambushed, betrayed." "Good," Margaret said. "Because if he doesn't feel the betrayal, he won't feel the urgency." Elena stared at her. "You're his mother, which is why I have to save the parts of him that still want to live." Minutes later, the room was full. Executives, legal advisors, Margaret, and Elena standing by the fireplace, clutching the edge of a chair like it was the only thing keeping her upright. When Aiden entered, he looked almost normal, almost. A tailored suit, polished shoes, but there was a tremor in his right hand and a vague, unfocused quality in his gaze that Elena recognized immediately. He paused when he saw the room, then his eyes locked with hers. Betrayal, just like she had warned. "What is this?" he asked. "Some kind of intervention." "We need to talk about your health," Margaret said, "and the future of this company. So you brought my maid into it." He said, voice sharp. "She's not your maid," Margaret said calmly. "She's the only one who's told you the truth." He laughed bitter and hard. "This is unbelievable." "Please," Elena said, stepping forward. "Just listen to what he snapped, to how I've lost control, to how everyone's been watching me fall apart like a damn experiment." "You're not falling apart," she said. "You're fighting something alone that you don't have to fight alone." "You think I need saving?" "No," she said softly. "I think you need to stop pretending you don't." His mouth opened, but no words came. He looked around the room at the people watching him with clinical pity. Then at Elena, who was not watching him at all like they were. Her eyes held no pity, only pain and something else. Devotion. Something shifted. His knees buckled slightly. He gripped the table to steady himself. Then with slow, deliberate movements, he sat down. "Tell me what I need to do," he whispered. The tension in the room broke like glass. Margaret exhaled. The advisors nodded. Elena stepped forward, reaching into her bag. "Dr. Cole has already scheduled an MRI. We'll go tonight. Quietly, no press. And if they find what we think he asked, then we treat it. Together." His eyes met hers again. This time there was no distance, no pride, only a man laying down the last of his armor. "Stay," he said, "through all of it." "I will," she said, and she meant it. That night, as the car took them through the quiet streets, he reached for her hand in the dark, not for comfort, but to ground himself, and she let him. When the MRI results came back 2 days later, they confirmed everything. A slow, growing tumor pressing against his temporal lobe. Operable, dangerous, time-sensitive. The surgery was scheduled within 72 hours. He insisted on seeing Elena just before he was wheeled into the OR. "If I don't come back the same," he said, "will you still stay?" She smiled, tears in her eyes. "You were never perfect." "Aiden, that's never why I stayed." and then he was gone behind the swinging doors, and she waited for 6 hours alone, but not afraid, because for the first time she believed he wanted to come back. The news came just after sunrise. The surgery had been successful. The tumor had been removed with minimal complications. There was no sign of permanent damage. The doctors were optimistic. Elena sat in the recovery room waiting area, the silence around her buzzing with exhaustion and relief. Her back ached from the plastic chair. Her hands trembled slightly from lack of sleep. But none of that mattered, because he was alive. A nurse appeared at the doorway. "You can see him now. He's awake but still groggy." Elena nodded and stood following the nurse down a long corridor that smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender. When she entered the room, Aiden was lying in the hospital bed, his eyes half-open, skin pale but peaceful. A clear bandage covered the side of his head, and wires ran from his chest to the monitors beside him. He looked smaller somehow, less like a man who ruled boardrooms, and more like someone learning how to be human again. She moved quietly to his side. His eyes fluttered, then focused. Slowly. "Elena," he whispered. She leaned closer. "I'm here." He reached for her hand with effort, the motion weak but intentional. "I thought I was dreaming," he said. "You kept saying my name in the recovery room the nurse had told her earlier, even before you were fully awake." Elena smiled through the tears that welled up in her eyes. "You made it through, did I?" he asked, voice soft. "Because this doesn't feel like the life I had. Maybe that's a good thing." He turned his head slightly, grimacing. "If this is the new version of me, it's going to need some upgrades." She laughed gently. "You have time. No rush. You stayed." "Of course I did. Even after I pushed you away. Especially after that." He closed his eyes briefly, then reopened them. "I don't know how to say thank you without it sounding too small." "Then don't say thank you. Just live better." Days passed. Aiden's recovery was steady but slow. Physical therapy, cognitive evaluations, rest. No board meetings, no calls, no suits. Just a man learning to walk through the world without the illusion of invincibility. Elena visited daily. At first, she stayed only an hour or two, helping him with small exercises, bringing books talking about trivial things. But soon their conversations deepened. They spoke about grief, about guilt, about second chances, and about Dario. Aiden confessed more than once that he had tried to forget the boy's name, the clinic, the guilt. Elena confessed she had spent years replaying that loss as her own failure. They forgave Dario's ghost together. After 2 weeks, he was discharged. But instead of returning to the penthouse, Aiden chose a modest townhouse near the river. "Too many mirrors in the old place," he said. Elena moved in, but not as staff, as something undefined, more than a friend, not yet a lover, just two people choosing to breathe in the same space. One evening they sat on the rooftop under string lights and silence. He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a letter. Official, sealed, her name at the top. Her license had been reinstated. Through the help of legal connections and letters written by physicians who reviewed her old case. Her career was no longer over. She was a therapist again. Elena looked up stunned. You did this," he said. "I just made sure the world couldn't look away anymore." She tried to speak, but no words came. So instead she kissed him, not with desperation, not with obligation, just with truth. It was soft, slow, a long overdue acknowledgement. When she pulled away, he whispered, "I didn't know I needed saving until you refused to walk away." And that night, for the first time, he didn't sleep with a wall between them. He slept beside her, in peace. Months passed. Together they opened a wellness center downtown, offering free rehabilitation programs for underserved communities. Elena ran the operations. Aiden handled the fundraising. They worked quietly without fanfare, but word spread. People began referring to the project not by its official name, but as the Second Chance House. The name stuck. One afternoon, as they walked through the main hallway, Aiden stopped and pointed to a framed photo on the wall. It was Dario's smile. "He saved me, too," Aiden said. "I just didn't know it until now." Elena squeezed his hand. "And now we save others, together." For once, there was no crisis waiting on the other end of the phone. No looming threat of scandal or shame. Just quiet, just healing, together. 6 months later, Elena stood behind a podium in a modest auditorium filled with people who probably never imagined a former maid would stand in front of them with her shoulders back and her voice steady. Behind her was a banner that read, "The Second Chance House, Annual Benefit." In front of her sat Aiden, no longer the man who once collapsed in a penthouse, but a partner in every sense of the word. He still walked with a slight limp from the surgery, and his right hand trembled when he was tired, but he smiled easily now, fully. Elena looked out at the audience, her hands resting on the edges of the lectern, her gaze catching the eyes of doctors, nurses, students, and former patients who now stood as proof that redemption was more than a word. "There was a time not so long ago," she began, "when I believed that once the world stripped you of your title, your position, your voice, you became invisible. I spent 5 years living in that invisibility, hiding behind uniforms and silence, convincing myself that competence meant nothing without credentials. Then one day, someone I worked for collapsed in front of me, and I was faced with a choice: walk away like the world had done with me, or fight to save a life that might never acknowledge mine." She paused, letting the silence settle. "I chose the second, not because he deserved it, but because some things are bigger than what we deserve." Her eyes met Aiden's. He nodded just once. That day changed everything, not just for him, but for me. Because in choosing to fight for a man who had once ignored my existence, I found my own voice again. I remembered who I was before I was erased. A healer, a woman who sees people even when they don't see her. And in that moment, I didn't need permission to be who I had always been. A few quiet gasps rippled through the audience. Someone wiped away tears. "Today I wear no title on my chest, but I carry a name. One that was once whispered in dismissal, but is now spoken with respect. Elena." She let the name hang in the air. A name that once meant nothing to a room full of executives, now opened doors that had once slammed shut. "The greatest revenge," she said, "is not destroying the people who overlooked you. It is becoming so undeniable that their ignorance cannot survive your presence." A quiet hush fell over the room, then applause, long, steady, standing. Aiden was the first to rise. When Elena stepped off the stage, he reached for her hand, interlaced their fingers, and brought it to his lips. "You didn't just save me," he whispered. "You showed me how to live. You showed me I never stopped being who I was," she said. That night they walked home together, not as billionaire and maid, not as patient and caregiver, but as two people who had chosen to rewrite the story the world had written for them. The lights of the city flickered across the river, and Elena looked up at him, a smile on her lips. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "what would have happened if I hadn't stayed that morning?" He looked down at her eyes, soft. "No," he said, "because you did, and that was all that mattered."